started. And I believe I see 3 members of the DRB in the room, so we can go ahead and get started whenever, if your whole team is here, Carrie. Yep, not expecting anyone else. Okay. So then, Mr. Chair.
We're all here.
Okay, great. Well, then I will start sharing my screen.
Yes, please do. Let's call this meeting to session with a roll call, please.
Ms. Anthony? Sorry, I'm just adjusting my screen to make sure I can see everybody. Ms. Bright? Ms. Clement?
Present.
Thank you. Ms. Dickinson? Mr. Kepler?
Present.
Present. Ms. Shao?
Present.
You and Mr. Stevie?
I'm here.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Fantastic. Well, let's launch right into it. The first order of business is always to approve last meeting's recorded minutes. Is there a motion to do that?
Yes.
Motion to approve the LER.
Okay, thank you, Paige. Is there a second? I think I heard
I will
Chris.
second the motion. Carol Clement.
Carol, thank you. All right, the motion is on the table. I'll call for a vote. All in favor say aye or raise your hand. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay.
Aye.
All right, any opposed say nay. I heard no nays. Motion passes. Let's have a call to the audience. Anybody on this call consider themselves an audience member, not a staff member, not a board member, and not a applicant? Anybody like that on the call that wants to identify themselves?
Yes, I'd like to identify myself. My name is Alice Brown.
Good morning, Alice.
Thank you.
Do you have would you like to say anything to the board this morning before we move to the next agenda item?
Yes, I would. I would like to speak to item number 4.
Item number 4. Okay, we can have you speak for 2 minutes, and we welcome that. So go ahead.
Thank you.
Please. Yeah.
Thank you. Shall I go ahead now?
Yes. Now's the time. So yes, please.
Yes. Thank you very much. This is in reference to case number DRB 2212, 471 West Congress Street, the mixed-use OCR2 zoning in the Rio Nuevo area. My name is Alice Brown, and I live approximately 4 blocks from 471 West Congress Street. I'd like to comment on the apartment project proposed for this address. The photograph of the 17-story glass and concrete structure that has been published does not appear to be consistent with the style or the scale of the surrounding neighborhood. In my opinion, the large buildings to the east of this site, the courthouse buildings and those to the west, the Sentinel Senior Housing and the West End Apartments, all evoke a fairly traditional Western style that is appropriate in this historic area. They allow for scenic views to the mountains beyond. I would suggest that the proposed new building's design would not fit in where it is sited in this location. I would like to reference the Rio Nuevo design criteria as determining that this building may not be the best choice for this location. In attachment A, Rio Nuevo area design criteria, UDC section 5.12.7.c, Rio Nuevo area building design standards. Development within the RNA is required to comply with the following building design standards. Number 1, the proposed buildings shall respect the scale of those buildings located in the development zone and serve as an orderly transition to a different scale pursuant to section 5.12.8.b, development standards. Building heights with a vastly different scale than those on adjacent properties should have a transition in scale to reduce and mitigate potential impacts. In area undergoing change, long-range plans should be consulted for guidance as to appropriate heights. The courthouse and the federal buildings are 7 and 8 stories, and the Sentinel and the West End apartment buildings are 4 stories. And my concern is that a 17-story building would not be consistent with those appropriate heights. In addition, I would reference for you number 13. New buildings shall use materials, patterns, and elements that relate to the traditional context of the downtown area, and I would submit that glass and concrete are not traditional materials. Finally, in section UDC section 5.12.7.d, 3b, views of all historic properties and all natural elements surrounding the downtown should be considered during design. I would include our beautiful mountains as natural elements and wonder if the designers were actually on the site and had a chance to look around. This building does not seem to me to be suited well to Tucson, as I suggest, and particularly at this location. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, message received. Thank you, Alice. And I should have asked at the beginning for you to state your full name and address. We always do that for anybody that speaks. Could you do that now? Could you speak your full name and address for the record?
Yes, I would be happy to. My name is Alice Brown, and my address is 237 South Avenida del Palo Fierro, Tucson.
Thank you, Alice. Is there anyone else that's in the audience that would like 2 minutes to speak? Okay, doesn't sound like there's anyone else. So now we're on agenda item number 4, which is a case DRB 2212, and I'll ask for staff to give us an introduction to the case, and then we'll have the applicant present the case, and then the DRB will deliberate on their recommendations. Go ahead, staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, as you said, this project is case number DRB 2212, located at 471 West Congress Street. This is a mixed-use project, 17-story, 354 multi-family residential units and ground floor commercial retail, located on the corner of Congress Street and I-10 in a currently vacant parcel. This is a Rio Nuevo project, and this is a courtesy review, so no formal action will be taken during this meeting. And there are additional staff on this call available to answer any questions regarding PDSD. And with that, I'll pass it over to...
Yeah, and
right.
I just want to say thank you for reminding us that it's a courtesy review. So this is sort of like a lunch and learn without the lunch. And we're getting to know the project. Thank you.
So with that, I would invite Carrie or your team to take over and let me know if you need me to share my screen.
Absolutely. Thank you, Amanda. And actually, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen if that's okay. Well, that'll, I think, override you. I'm Carrie Sylvan with Lazarus and Sylvan, 5983 East Grant Road, representing the development group. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Famous last words. Is it sharing? Can you all see it?
Yes, we can see it.
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm gonna
Yep.
do full screen. Now you can see it better, and hopefully I can navigate. So I'm going to introduce some of our team members who are here, and we're gonna step through the project. Appreciate Ms. Brown's comments. We know this is a little bit of a change, and one that actually the long range planning and the zoning that was adopted not that many years ago actually encourages this type of a context change, but obviously still meeting the design review criteria, which we believe we are. And we're happy, Ms. Brown as well, our contact information will be available, is available, and we're happy to sit down and talk as well. So the group that's here with me, Bob Burke, to my right with Urban Street. He's going to introduce himself in just a minute. Karen Caesar is also here with Novak Environmental, our local landscape architect working really diligently. And Chad Keller is here as well from Novak on a different screen, not in the same room. Jackson Cassidy is a land planner in our office as well. And then you've got a team from Antunovich, Joe Antunovich, Brian Tiemann, and Greg Gorski, sorry, Greg, are there from cold Chicago, where it's currently snowing and not going to be 71 like it is going to be here this afternoon. What I'm going to do is ask Bob to introduce himself, and then I'm going to take it back over, talk through a couple of quick things, and then really this is about the architecture and the landscape architecture. So you'll be happy to know that the zoning consultant is not going to pretend to be an architect or a landscape architect. So we'll turn it over to them. And then we are excited to get some feedback during this courtesy review. And then there's a couple of things that we definitely need feedback from you on, and I'll talk about those in just a minute. So Bob.
Great. Good morning. My name is Bob Burke. I'm the managing partner of the Urban Street Group. We're a Chicago-based development firm. I started the business in 1989, so we've been in business for a very long time. I want to thank you guys for doing this courtesy review. It's an enormous help for us. And I also want to thank the municipal staff and elected officials that we've had the pleasure of meeting with thus far in this process. We are very excited about this potential project. We have been very active looking for certain types of projects. And this fits our bill. We feel like our team has taken into account the varying degrees of design restrictions in the area. But we're very excited to be here, and I thank everybody for their time very much.
Okay, here we go. I'm also thanking you for the courtesy review. We appreciate this. As you know from the submittal and the letter that we submitted as well, so the mixed use, we're really excited about it. 17 stories, retail on the ground floor, and enclosed parking. It's in the Rio Nuevo area of the downtown infill, which is why we're here in front of you today. The initial design and focus was to make sure that we meet the criteria in those design review. And we have, as you know, a narrative kind of stepping through how we meet those criteria. One of the things I want to highlight that we're going to need, well, let me just go to the next. So most of you probably know the site. It is the gateway to downtown. Right now, the gateway is a Circle K, and we're hoping to change that and create a very different gateway into the downtown. It's the southeast corner of I-10 and Congress. It's 4.16 acres. It's on the west side is the El Paso and Southwestern Depot pedestrian and bike path. Clearly, it's not there yet. but it's connected to the north and it's connected to the south. And so it's part of the city plans in the most recent bond package, and will be developed, and we intend to tie into that. The zoning on the site, and this is important, is OCR2. OCR2 is the office commercial residential 2. It's the highest intensity zoning, and it permits up to 300 feet. That zoning was put in place in 2011. There was a developer that was interested in developing the site. There's always been a lot of discussion. I've been in Tucson since actually 1989. And there's always been discussion about this site and the opportunity, and definitely maintaining the context, but acknowledging it's an entry to our downtown. And that OCR1 zoning, which matched the long range planning, the Plan Tucson and the prior plans, to make sure that this site is utilized and really creates the densities and like I said, permitted at the 300 feet. So it was always intended. And actually, we've gotten some feedback from some other folks asking us to go higher and utilize the full 300 feet. I included this to just kind of give you the context of the site. This is the part of the materials that were given to you. This talks through the development zone, mainly the setbacks, because that's the issue that we need. We are requesting some feedback from you on setbacks. The Unified Development Code actually requires setbacks to be the height of the building. So this building is about 196, let's just say 200 feet. And on Congress and I-10, it would require 200-foot setbacks. That is not consistent with urban design. It's not consistent with actually our development zone at all. And so this gives you a little bit more flavor for those setbacks along Congress. They range from 20 feet to 90 feet, and along I-10 in our development zone from 40 feet to 200. The 200-foot is was the temporary Greyhound bus depot. So the setbacks really that we're proposing that you'll hear about in a minute are more consistent with the development zone. As most of you know, in the development process, our next step is going to be to submit a development package, and that's a fully engineered set of drawings. And so the reason we're asking specifically for feedback on the setbacks, as well as whatever other feedback, is because we want to embark on that next step. And the setbacks are going to be key to laying out this layout of the building. With that, I'm going to, this just lets you know, this really is in the heart of, frankly, all of our infill incentive districts that encourage density, definitely context, and parking relief and other things. So it's covered with almost all of those infill incentive districts to create an urbanized development. I'm going to highlight just a few things, and then I'm going to turn this over to Antunovich and to Karen. So I mentioned before it's 17 stories. It's just under 200 feet, which is under the 300 foot that's required by the zoning. We talked through the setbacks already. So our front setback is set at about 82 feet, and you'll see that's where the entrance is. And so we have to get people in. We have the portico share entry kind of area and the retail area, and we want to create a nice landscaped and ornamental, really an entryway into the downtown that Karen will talk a little bit more about in a minute. And with that, the 82 feet is really what makes this work. You'll see over on the east, the greenway, it's sort of, it's a little bit grayed out. This is the city is going to be constructing that addition, the connectivity to the greenway. And so our setback on the east, including the greenway, is about 27 feet. On the west, there's a sidewalk area with significant vegetation that Karen will talk about in a minute. That setback is about 68 feet. So I-10 is 68 feet, Congress is 82 feet. And on the south, we have some development limitations. There are some easements back here where we can't build a building. And so our setback is 173 feet. But what we're doing with that area is really creating a large open space and greenway and connectivity so that there's an ability to move around the building and connect to the greenway. Brian, I am going to turn it over to you and I will be your Vanna White. So just let me know. I'm not even sure if everybody on this phone understands that reference, but Jackson's shaking his head no. I will go ahead and move the screen for you as desired. So I'm going to go ahead and mute and you can tell me when to flip the screen. Go ahead, Brian.
All right, thank you, Carrie. Again, I am Brian Tiemann from Antunovich Associates. Oh, we lost this. We lost.
I'll get it back. Keep going. This is what
Okay.
happens when I'm in charge of buttons. Go ahead.
First off, we are here on the site plan, so I'm just going to talk about first the site limitations and why we laid out things the way we did. First off, Carrie touched on most of the key points. To our west is freeway, the frontage road, I-10. So we were not allowed accessibility for curb cuts off of that. To the south, we have an adjacent property with easements. Again, no vehicular access off of that. And then the future proposed greenway to be installed on our east. So that limits our access to this entire site off of Congress. And so when we look at Congress, we want to be as far to the east as possible with our vehicular access, as far away from the intersection as possible to reduce any traffic conflicts. You know, right now we don't know if it's a right in, right out only, or if there will be full access. Our initial thought is right in, right out only, but we will further investigate what that is. So what that means with all that limited access around the site is that we will need to provide an internal fire access road around the entirety of our building. And that kind of established where our setbacks are going to be, truthfully, because we would like to be as close to the street edges as possible, but we need to provide this access. So once we do that, we also didn't want that to be the only reason for that road. So it is also serving as our service for the building. So things like loading for the building, garbage, etc. We'll also use this ring road around the building. And this also allows us to have this setback and create a pedestrian plaza and motor court and drop off here at the front of the building, a porte cochere or covered drop off, if you will, at the beginning of the building. And it also establishes where we have access to our podium garage. So with all that set up, it kind of dictates where everything for our proposed building will go. At the ground level, at the front of our building, we create separation between Congress and our garage at the base of the building with a series of residential amenities, including the lobby, a lounge, bike rooms, mail rooms, storage, and our retail component, which is closest to Congress. It's not a very large retail component. It will probably mostly serve the residents of the building as an additional amenity. I'm not going to say exactly what that might be at this point, but it will be directly accessible to the residents of the building, but will obviously be available to the public at whole. One quick comment on the landscaping is that this is a very ambitious landscaping plan compared to other developments in the area. Karen will obviously speak to how that is implemented, but I think you can see that we are pushing very heavily on the landscaping everywhere throughout the site. And at the corner of Congress and I-10, there will be a future monument sign or gateway sign, what have you, that will be worked with the city in the future to more formally present this as the gateway to downtown. Carrie, I think we can move to the next slide.
Could we ask for you to zoom in on the frontage there, just so I could read those labels on the previous slide? Is it possible to zoom? There's a lot.
Should be seeing the previous slide. There is a delay, by the way, in all of you seeing what I'm doing, so I promise I'm listening and looking at the slide. Go ahead.
I was hoping to zoom in so that we could sort of explore that a little bit. And maybe it is zooming in. In the meantime, I'd like to buy a vowel.
Thank you for acknowledging.
Yes.
Okay, let me, I'm gonna make this worse when it comes to zooming, before I make it better. You wanna look at the labels up on the top?
Yeah, so we just see the layout a little bit better to get an understanding of, so those, the things labeled coffee shop, lobby, those are more, what's the height of those?
So all of those functions still fall within the base of the entirety of the tower above.
Okay, so those still are 17 floors.
Yeah.
Correct.
I see. I thought maybe that was the transition, a softer transition, but it's the transition of commercial before you get to residential.
Yes, the porte cochere function or the covered drop-off area below still has the entirety of the building above it as well.
Oh, okay.
Huh.
Any observations that the DRB wants to make on this? Because this was a lot of information to take in.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. Applicant, could you please explain them exactly what you mean by a podium garage? I'm not familiar with that expression.
So a podium garage simply means that there are other functions above the garage. So a large portion of our tower lies upon the garage.
Okay, thank you.
And is the garage underground? Is it below grade?
All garage is above grade.
Oh, that's good. So you won't have to dig a basement.
No.
And Brian, correct me if we're wrong, but in response to the question about sort of transition, it's not 17 floors at the wall of the beginning of the building. There is a transition, a piece that's coming out that's at a lower scale, correct?
Yes, there's a small portion of the lobby area that juts out outside of the tower plane on both the front facade as well as on the side facing the green.
Not really, Bob. There are balconies that set back above this space, but truly the entire function of the building above is pretty much flush with that very front. I guess we'll call it the coffee shop.
Understood.
At the front. There is a small setback when we look at the pink portion here on the plan on the very right-hand side. That's what we're calling the bike room.
That's what I was thinking.
A portion of that does set back.
That's what I was thinking. I'm sorry. Sorry I confused it. That's what I was thinking.
So let's, now that we have this zoomed in, could you tell us the setback from Congress Street again? The number of feet from Congress Street.
That's 83.
83 feet.
Yeah.
Okay, and that goes from the property line to the leading edge of the coffee shop, for example.
Yeah.
That is from the face of the curb on Congress to the face of the building.
Thank you. 83 feet. Got it. Any other observations, design review board? clarifications that you want to make?
I would just like to make one point. The dark brown indicates the traffic circulation into the parking garage. Blue at the base is the 3-story parking garage, all above grade. But the circle, the landscape circle in the center, is surrounded by the circulation, the brown that's indicated there. You come off of Congress, you can come directly into the parking garage, a 2-way traffic, straight into the parking garage, and 3-story garage with 459 spaces. Or you can circulate around. If you're, grandma visiting, you can come pick up your grandson or granddaughter at the front door by coming around the porte cochere. It's a very, very landscape, urban kind of solution to the drop off and pickup under the porte cochere.
I guess the presentation isn't over, right? We're just talking about this drawing, is that correct?
I interrupted them to look at this, so they do have more presentation.
Yeah,
I guess
it might make sense to finish the presentation and take questions, because we can always go back to the slides, but I don't want to interrupt if you want to talk about this slide a little bit more. Go ahead.
I know you guys spoke about the setbacks, but presumably you're going for variances with that. I would just argue it's not very urban right now, right? Because just creating a road off a road, in a sense, with Congress. Did you look at actually, most of the other buildings on Congress are right at the street. So what is the comment about that?
Sure, good question. So it's actually not a variance. It is this design review permits looking at the prevailing setbacks in the development area and acknowledging that this portion of Congress is right up against I-10. A lot of the buildings along Congress, and that was the sheet that I showed you a couple sheets ago, the setbacks range along Congress in this area. Again, different than the more pedestrian area that's in the kind of heart of downtown. These setbacks in this development area range from 20 feet to 90 feet. And
yeah, but the ones close to this are all much closer to the street. Whatever that says, right?
I believe that your setback gets greater the taller your building.
Yeah.
So it's a chart that you have to follow according to the height of the building.
Oh, I know. I'm just saying that it's not urbanistic, though. I'm just arguing that.
So let me try and explain the two different concepts. So the underlying Unified Development Code is what we generally have to comply with. That would require us to set back 200 feet, right, from Congress and 200 feet from I-10. Acknowledging that we're trying to create a more urban environment, but we also have to realize we're on a major road and we've got to get people off, and we have to create kind of that entry in that space. We are permitted to work with you on more urban setbacks. Understand the comment that it doesn't feel quite as urban. Maybe it should be pushed forward. Part of what we're dealing with is a constrained site. It's 4.16 acres. We can't do anything on the back, on the south. As we said, there's easements back there, drainage and other easements. So in place, and then it's a narrow site. So what we tried to do was push the building as close as we could, but still allow functioning access as well as the required fire access that goes around it. So 100% understand the comment that it's more urban the closer you get. We also wanted to create an entry off of I-10 to Congress that isn't necessarily the beginning of a 17-story or even one that's smaller and scaled back building. We really want to create a landscape, and that's part of what we're going to talk about in just a minute, sort of how this entry works. And so it's kind of all been pieced together. 100% understand the comment that it's more urban if we pull the building forward, but we have some other constraints that we're working with as well. Did that help explain where we are?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask a question. This is Carol Clement. You mentioned that it's a right in, right out only. So at least that's where what you're proposing right now. So if I want to enter the site, I have to drive and do a U-turn around the island at the intersection of Three-Way Road and Congress, and then come back in. Is that correct?
I think the answer is we're still working with the Department of Transportation, DTM, and Mobility. I forgot what the M was. Department of Transportation and Mobility on exactly how that's going to work, because it's a good question, and we'd like it to be more full turning movements. We're not sure if we can do that safely.
Yeah.
That's going to be part of the cool part about a courtesy review is we get to come to you early. The downside of a courtesy review is we don't have answers to all of the questions yet. But I think Brian's comment was meant to point out we're focused on this. We know this is an issue, and we need to work with city staff on figuring that out. So hopefully when we come back to you after our first development package review, I'll have a better answer for that.
Okay, well, let's let the applicant progress on their presentation. Thank you for allowing the interruption there.
No problem at all. I'm going to go, oh, look, I did that.
Wow.
I am Vanna White. All right. Okay, Brian, I will go to the next slide.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, okay. There you go.
Thank you. So this is the roof plan. We are just calling out some of the varying heights of our building. Obviously, they're all stated and you've probably reviewed. Our tallest height being the 194.6 at the mechanical penthouse. We also stepped the building several times. You will see that we have a portion of the building that steps down at the 17th floor, the 16th floor, at a rooftop amenity deck. We have a covered space on the 17th floor, the pool deck on top of the garage at 30 feet, and the parking deck, which has a portion exposed at a finished floor height of 20 feet. I'd also like to address here that this shows the footprint of the tower above the parking podium. Generally, it's an L shape. We have chosen to align or create this shape because we are attempting to do a few things here. Firstly, we're aligning with the garage on the western side of the site along I-10. What that affords us to do is get some shade on our pool deck in the afternoon, and we'll talk more about this when we get to the shade study. It also allows us to block I-10 from our large outdoor amenity space, therefore possibly reducing some of our noise from the interstate. So that was the thinking behind our overall orientation. And one last point, Bob pointed this out, on the very right-hand portion of our tower, we have a step-down portion where we were showing previously the bike room and other amenities in that space. With that, I will hand it over to Karen, and we will go into our landscape drawings.
This is one of the pages that's in the middle, and it's just a lot of the data, so we're going to skip over that. But we can come back to it if you have any questions. Go ahead, Karen.
All right. Good morning, everybody. And again, thanks for getting up early on a Friday and doing this with us. I'm going to talk about the landscape program right now, and I'm going to focus it as I'm going to orient it to some of the Rio Nuevo design guidelines to talk about what we're doing supports that, fulfills that, pays attention to that. Overall, obviously, it's a small site. I think Carrie said 4.1 acres in an urban setting. There's our areas to landscape are on the perimeter of the site on all sides, and while they're small, they're very key and important to the site and the context and the setting, and also fulfilling the Rio Nuevo design guidelines, the intent of that for urban areas. Overview, we've got on the north, obviously we have the entryway opportunity and landscape going around clockwise. On the east side of the building, the landscape is, I'm going to give an overview, is going to focus on its relationship to the proposed future greenway. The south, we have open space, which we're proposing to have a dog park that's available not only for the residents, but the community. And then on the east side, along the interstate and freeway, we are really proposing a very robust pedestrian path with a lot of shade and trees. So that's your high level overview. Specifically in the Rio Nuevo guidelines, there's a requirement for adequate shade for sidewalks and pedestrian pathways. Specifically on the west side, the current situation there within the right of way is a dilapidated 4-foot concrete sidewalk with a few trees that are on the east side of the sidewalk. We're proposing to demolish that and create a wider 10-foot sidewalk, pushing it more to the east and allowing us to have trees on both sides. But the trees on the west side particularly are important for providing that afternoon shade for that pedestrian area. But it will be walking through basically an alley or a streetscape of trees where we'll have elk, and we're looking at all native trees and bringing them along there to create that nice pedestrian way and shaded walkway. The other thing that Carrie talked about between the fire access road and the pathways and everything, we're looking to create a complete loop around this building. That's for pedestrian connectivity, and it's also brings the concept of a 24-hour street level activity being encouraged. When you have an urban use like this, residential use, a lot of people have pets, companion animals, dogs, and one of the things you got to do multiple times a day is walk your dog, and there's nothing like having that out the front door walking loop to provide that opportunity, as well as just a little bit of stretch your legs opportunity. And I bring that up specifically because that really builds community. And I know this from personal experience and from my whole career working in trails and paths, that when you are out walking, passing people, you get to know them, you say hi in a very non-threatening, very community building sort of way that you don't necessarily have sitting in a plaza where if a person walked up to you and said hi, you might feel a little awkward. So the ability to provide that out the door, loop around path is really key to creating a lot of activity all around the clock and creating that sense of community there. On the corner right there, though, we've talked a lot about this is the gateway to downtown. We are proposing, it's not yet even conceived, but just the space is proposed, that there'll be some sort of gateway monument feature, and that will complement the building as well as really create a landmark entry to downtown. We're even proposing and going to consider a design, if possible, that creates what I call a selfie spot. Someplace where people want to go and get there. I've arrived here in Tucson. So the design of that is not even, we've got the space for it. We haven't even started what that looks like, but it is the opportunity at the gateway there to create that iconic image and gateway to downtown. On the east side, where we've got the ability to connect to the future gateway greenway path, we've got there's a notch in the building. There'll be a little plaza area there that will provide a little seating opportunity and an opportunity for residents to hang out and connect to the Greenway Plaza. And then finally on the south, where Carrie had mentioned that there's easements that prohibit any building there. They don't prohibit open space, and we're proposing a large open space that includes a dog park, a free play dog park, a path through that, and again, more open space. Between that open space and the plaza notch to the north, we do meet our 5%, the Rio Nuevo guidelines for 5% plaza and open space. So I think those are the highlights that we've got right now, and at the end of the presentation or now, I'd be happy to. Oh yeah, here again in your packet we have a few little blow up of the area. I think what's really I think one of the things we're excited about the whole thing, but the opportunity to really create a nice pedestrian walkable loop as well as that gateway is really a great opportunity here.
And we'll turn it back over to Brian, I think, and Joe.
Yes, thank you. I'm sure most of you had a chance to thumb through these precedent examples. So I'm not going to hit every single point on all these buildings. A lot of them are duplicate points. So there might be 1 or 2 points on every building I will speak to, but overall, I'd like to just say that the buildings that we're presenting here are close to or in very close proximity to the property lines, something we are endeavoring to do with ours to get as close as possible. They are glass heavy buildings, and most of them have a metal panel.
Sorry.
metal panels as a part of them. So starting off with One South Church, we present this as just an example of height within the district. We would like to also state that it is the tallest building in Tucson, and it also has context buildings which are nowhere near its height, and we feel that that is appropriate to bring up. Next is Hub on Campus at Speedway. While not in the district, we feel it has materiality that also speaks to what we're attempting to do. At Hexagon, we have floor-to-ceiling glass. We also have a randomized panel system, which is something we are going to show you as a part of our building and elevations, and we'll speak to that here in a little bit. If we go to the next slide. The Rendezvous also has metal panels, partially inset balconies, and it has a highlighted colored panels, which is something we're looking to implement. Olive and the Graduate at Tucson. Here we're primarily talking about the height again and the context. They are at 15 floors plus mechanical penthouse. Again, we are asking for 17 plus mechanical penthouse. The Plaza Centro, here we're basically speaking to the perforated metal panel system of the parking structure itself, something we are looking to implement and we'll talk about further. Next slide, please. The Urbane, again, has the balconies, the floor-to-ceiling glass, window wall system, rooftop amenities. The Flynn, again, has inset balconies. Again, the property line issues we're talking about, outdoor amenity space with grill stations and pools and such. And lastly, at 33 North Stone, again, we're speaking to the height within the district and the glazing around it. With that, the next slides are the elevations.
Brian, before you move on, I want to point out to the Rio Nuevo Design Review Board that a lot of these, what you're not seeing are the buildings that most of the buildings in our development area are government buildings, and government buildings have very different design criteria. A lot of them have to do with safety. And you don't see a lot of glazing and glass in a lot of those buildings, especially the federal. So those are not in here, but what are in here are the multifamily, the newer multifamily, and the downtown context that's really being encouraged for this site. from the zoning as well as the long range planning. So I just want to point that out. Brian, go ahead. We're going to skip through the elevations, and I'm going to go straight to the renderings, and then we can come back to the elevations if needed. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, so Mr. Antunovich, Joe Antunovich, will be now speaking to the renderings.
Thank you, Brian. I just wanted to point out that Antunovich Associates are experienced in Tucson. We've in fact built 6 buildings right around the University of Arizona, 3 of which are illustrated in these 3 previous packets. The Hub, the Olive, and Urbane are all projects, residential student projects we've built, but they show a certain architecture that is duplicated and replicated on our proposal here at 471 West Congress. Our idea here was to create a gateway to downtown, Tucson. We talked a little bit about the landscape at the corner and how that will be developed into a monument entry element to downtown. This drawing here does not show the improved landscape that was gone over earlier. What it does show is the slope of the road on the frontage road to the right. You can see that the grades drop off. That street we're not allowed to have any access to, but it also illustrates the 82-foot setback that we have on the left from Congress to the face of our building. There were some questions about, does the retail protrude out? Actually, the retail can't protrude out any further than what we're showing because we have the access road and there's a large indentation on the corner that is not our property. So even if we wanted to move the building up further, we're limited by that indentation that occupies the monument sign and the monument celebration at the corner. We will continue to work with the city on the development of that element there. But this shows the building colored in Southwest colors intentionally, the T-shaped building that Brian talked about earlier. The building is faceted at the T-shape so that we're able to have a number of different facades. We're not just building a straight, sheer building. Building respects the corner, and yet it celebrates the corner. We've provided sun shading throughout all of the facades with these protruding balconies and inset balconies. The floor-to-ceiling glass in places is also highlighted by metal panels that are interdispersed on all of the facades. So our materials are floor-to-ceiling glass. These metal panels, as you can see, the edge of all of the slabs are covered in metal. There's no exposed concrete here. It's a very, very modern, very enclosed, very sophisticated building that we believe celebrates the corner of this great site. I did also want to point out, we are very consistent with the mayor's initiative to plant, what was it, 1 million trees?
Yes.
I think I counted 136 that we would be planting. So we're well on the way towards the mayor's initiative. Next slide, please. So here's another view of the property. This is really a front-on view, and you can see the porte cochere in the foreground on the lower level, and you can see that our building at the lower levels covers the parking 100%. You can see that there's no parking that's visible here. We've got 3 levels of parking on the lower levels, and that's totally enclosed and sheltered by the building on this lower level. As we go up the building, you can see the protrusion of the balconies, glass handrails on all of the balconies. Some of the balconies are recessed going in from the outside facade. some hang out so that they create an interesting shadow line on the facades of the building. The building does step vertically also. For instance, the wing that extends to the east on the left is almost 20 feet lower than the penthouse roof on the right. Next slide. Oh, yes, next slide. Another view of the building, and you can start to see at the base this is a view looking towards the east, towards the west. You can see in the foreground the screening of the 3 levels of parking. We've done that with a grid system, a metal grid system, which is indicative of some of the old masonry shade and wind walls that were constructed many years ago in the Tucson area. You could almost look at this and say, oh, that's really a masonry element from years ago. We would replicate that treatment with a metal panel that would screen all of the parking. But you can see how the building has this juxtaposition of facades because of the T-shaped nature of the building, creating much more than just a simple block. We've tried to vary the massing and vary the elements that are on the facade, vary the metal panels, vary the glass, the floor-to-ceiling glass, and the terraces that celebrate the inside-outside areas. Another view looking from the greenway, looking across at the building.
Next slide, please, Gary. Thank you.
Stairs at the corner, but you can see how the screening of the parking, with using a completely different treatment, which I like very much, and in contrast to the building, which has its glass and metal panel and shaded elements protruding in the background. Next slide. This is a little raised up so that we illustrate our outdoor pool area. Brian mentioned how that we've actually located it here so that in the afternoon it will be gathering some of the sun that comes from the west. And here you can see the 3 levels of parking, the actual pool amenity area, and the way in which the building actually reflects on itself with the glass and with the different materials, the different metal panels, the different terraces, creating a very articulated facade. It's not flat. It's not flat like Terry was saying. The government buildings are very sheer. They're very flat. But we wanted the building to be very expressive of its use, very expressive of its residential use. Next slide. And this is simply an indication of other buildings which have the kind of materials that we're proposing. On the left, examples of the metal cladding. In the center, in fact, the building that we're just completing now in the center, which has a very similar metal panel woven into the facade with terraces on the corners, and then a building at the lower element of the center area, which has a building of ours that has a glass upper level and more masonry at the base. And then the aluminum curtain wall that we would be using throughout with the metal covering the spandrels illustrated on the right here. Next slide. On the left, we have a couple of stairs from the parking garage, which would be wrapped in precast, and then the perforated metal cladding that would wrap around the parking area is illustrated in that in the center area there, and then the clear aluminum and glass guardrail on the right, creating this very transparent, wonderful view that you'll have of the surrounding landscape. Moving on to the backup material here, we're almost done. So going to the sunshade elements that follow, This shows, and we've shown elements showing the spring equinox, the fall equinox, and then the winter and summer. And this indicates, these particular slides indicate at 9:30 or 3:30, the amount of shading that we would have. The spring equinox is kind of the intermediate range of shadow. And you can see here that our building at 9:30, 12, and 3:30 has very little impact on the surrounding buildings. It doesn't touch any at all. And then even if we went to the summer solstice, the next slide, where the sun is the absolute highest and the shadows are the smallest, there's practically no shadows coming at all because the sun is at the highest point. And similarly on the autumn is almost the same as the spring. But I think even at the very last image, which shows between 9:30, 12, and 3, the winter solstice, where the sun is very, very low, the shadows that are cast from our building onto our surrounding neighbors is very minimal. It's because the site that we have is so removed really from the other buildings that surround us, the images that the shading that you see here is very minimal upon our surrounding neighbors. Now the backup materials here show other documentation that is necessary for submission. Turn this back to you, Carrie. We really don't need to go back to the elevations unless there's questions that come up during the question and answer.
Great. Thank you, team. I'm gonna, as Joe mentioned, the rest of the materials in the packet are required for the submittal. We're happy to reference them if you have any questions. We also provided you the written letter as well that goes through the criteria for Rio Nuevo and how we think we're meeting those criteria as well. We're not going to step through that. We figured you can read and you've had it for a little while, but we're happy to answer questions. And as I said before, the one area, the code defaults to 200-foot setbacks for Congress and I-10. We don't think that's right for this building with all of our site constraints. We'd like to be comfortable moving forward with the development package with the setbacks as we're proposing. This will come back to you, and staff can confirm this. This will come back to you after the first development package for consideration using those Rio Nuevo criteria as well. This is kind of the courtesy review initial feedback as we move into the development package. So with that, I've got the materials and can share them if you have questions and you want me to pull up certain slides. And Chairman, I am ready to turn it back to you and take your lead. You're now banned.
Well, thank you. Thank you for spinning us through that presentation. Very impressed with your preparation and the materials that you brought. Thank you. So we have architects and landscape architects and contractors here on our board. What are some of the comments that we can give or further questions we can ask for this courtesy review? And actually, I'll lead by asking staff, when we do review this case, what is going to be our purview? The criteria that we're going to be asked to consider in our recommendation. Is that the Rio Nuevo one that we always use?
Yes, that's correct. And I can pull it up on the screen now if you'd find that helpful.
I would find it.
If you're ready.
That would be sort of good for us to just have a context. This is the first time an applicant has come with a shade study, and it seemed like the shade study was geared towards, don't worry, we're not going to create a lot of shade. Because mostly we have a criteria to provide 50% shade on the summer solstice. to the pedestrian walkway. Okay, here,
Chairman, one of the reasons that we did that was we presented to other design review boards, and that's been a request, and I think it's part of the criteria for submittal. And a lot of the questions that we've had actually from those design review boards has been related to casting shadows for future solar on rooftops.
sure.
So
No,
that was the reason that we presented it that way, but you're right, it does add to the 50%, but we're not counting on the building for the 50% shade either.
okay, understood. And you know, we have not reviewed a building of this scale with this criteria, at least in my time here. So it is new to us. Maybe somebody could provide a little terminology education to me. When does a building go from mid-rise to high-rise by definition, or is it a blurred line?
For that,
Because yeah, a lot of the examples we saw, I consider mid-rises, 4 or 5 levels, but this one's 17. Is it in a different category?
when under the building code, under the International Building Code, once you go above 80 feet, that's a point of embarkation to a high-rise building. The Olive Building that we showed over by the University of Arizona, that's 15 stories, I mean 15, 16 stories. That's comparable height to what we have here. So, but from a code standpoint, that is the
80 feet. Okay, thank you.
between a low rise, medium rise, or a high rise, the 80 feet.
Good to know. I appreciate that. Carol, you seem like you have something to say. Your box is highlighted. Go ahead.
Okay, I have questions and some comments. My first 2 questions have to do with sustainability, resiliency. What is planned for the stormwater site drainage? Water falling from the sky, rain, what's being done with the storm water?
Yeah, hi, Carol, I'll take that one, and good morning and nice to see you.
Yes, thank you, Karen. Nice to see you. Thank you.
First of all, the site will fully comply with the Tucson water harvesting ordinance. Again, we don't have a lot of square footage, but what we have, we will be directing stormwater to the landscape areas to the extent that's appropriate. And the challenge is always, not overwhelming landscape areas. So that's the intent, is the plants are native, with a few exceptions. They'll be all low water use. And so sustainability and resiliency are key to what we're going to be planning, and to the extent we will comply. And then beyond that, a little bit of how much water and where it's all going to go. That kind of falls along the traffic comments on. We haven't gotten there yet, but the intent would be that whatever we have would take advantage of that, and look to be as capturing as much rainwater as possible to benefit the landscape.
Okay, so am I understanding you correctly that you will be trying to take the water that falls on the roof through the downspouts? I'm assuming the downspouts are internal in the building, and direct those, as well as direct site fall to the plantings, or will it only be what's going to be done with the water coming off of the building rooftops?
I think to that I'll look to the architect. So
What we are intending is to include water harvesting, just having tanks that would collect the rainwater. So that would allow us then to distribute that for irrigation. And
so you're intending active water harvesting?
Absolutely, yes.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yes.
I think
that, well, I know we'll see it later where those go. Okay. Another comment I have to do with regards to resiliency sustainability is, have you considered solar panels on all those different roof levels?
We haven't gotten to that point yet, but it's a great suggestion.
Okay.
I don't know
I'm
if you
sorry.
heard that. The answer from Bob was we are analyzing it.
Okay, good.
I would say the exposed garage has some opportunity for solar
Yeah.
panel coverage.
And provide shade to those poor cars parked on the 3rd level. Another comment I have in regards to the selfie spot, I like that idea. I was wondering if that whole north entryway monument idea, have you considered the accoutrement, the establishment of that monument? Have you considered that as a call to artists involving other community members into this development?
Great minds think
Yes.
alike, yes.
Oh, okay, great. And then, this would be to you, Miss Karen, the hybrid Palo Verdes, they're typically a cross between the Parkinsonia aculeata and Parkinsonia floridum. I have been watching those trees for over 10 years now. As those hybrids mature, it's my feeling that they become a weaker tree. They take on the weaker characteristics of the Parkinsonia aculeata, the Mexican Palo Verde. I don't like to see them specced anywhere, used. Last summer, when I went around town after a big windstorm, 90% of the trees that were wind thrown were those darn hybrids. They are pretty and fast growing in their juvenile stage, but as they mature, I think they become a weak tree, taking on the bad characteristics of the Parkinsonia aculeata. I would like to suggest a change from the specification of the hybrid to our beautiful state tree, Parkinsonia floridum.
Noted and do not disagree. The challenge at this point in time is we love the blue Palo Verdes. The blue Palo Verdes are actually my favorite tree.
Yeah.
The challenge we have with blue Palo Verdes is getting them, and they are subject to that witch's broom, and so but totally noted. Again, the foothill Palo Verde is not the proper tree to get a canopy. The blue Palo Verde absolutely does that. If we can do blues, I'd be all in for blues. I think we'll just have to make sure that we can get the blues, and a lot of that also has to do with maintenance and horticultural practices. But I've seen the same thing, and that's unfortunate because those hybrids can really look good and form a canopy. So, but we note that and agree with you.
I'm sure you're aware, Miss Karen, of the Bubba variety of the Chalopsis linearis, hand seed selected for more upright growth habit and less seed litter mess. That might be, you might consider that as a possibility. I don't know.
We've got that in there too. Again, we spec that particular, the Bubba variety all the time for all those reasons. We're trying to get, I think the predominant tree is going to be mesquite for all of its good qualities, including shade. And we would be using Palo Verdes and the desert willows, the ones that do grow tall and give us a canopy as accents, and just to provide some variety in there. We don't want to create a monoculture. So we're balancing, again, kind of urban design philosophies with organic, natural sustainability philosophies, and I hope that's really one of our preeminent design criteria when we do anything. Is we want it to 50 years from now we want this looking really good. So in order to do that, we need to have long-lived, sustainable plants and not rely on monoculture either.
Right. Well, I want to say I really appreciate your attention to double tree lined sidewalks that's going to be on the west elevation, and trees. I love your sensitivity to the mayor's goal of 1 million trees or whatever it is. I do want to, you're specifying date palms, males only, specimen. Now, in order to sex them, they have to be a good 8-10 feet tall before you can sex them. I'm sure you're aware of that, but I just thought I would, point that out.
Well, and if I can take a moment to talk about the date palms, and thank you for bringing that up. And again, remember that we are at the very beginning stages of all of our design and our landscape design. The male date palms are, when you have a building of this height, bringing it down to a pedestrian scale, the date palms do give you some instant height and allow us to transition to a pedestrian scale plant palette. So they're really going to be used as sort of background plants, very, very judiciously. And the whole deal with the male date palms, yeah, you bring them in, that you can come in, you get some instant height on the landscape. And if you don't do the male palms, then the females create the little dates. I have a friend who actually farms and produces dates, and I know a lot of date palms from her. So that's where we know to get the male palms. But they do come in. You can acquire them at a taller scale, and they do bring some instant scale and impact as you transition to the tree canopy of the native zone. So that's the attention.
I love the transition of using palms to natives on such a tall building. I think that's a great idea. Lastly, I do not like the perforated metal cladding. Maybe it's the color that was shown. I don't know. I just don't, something isn't sitting right when I look at it. And maybe it's the color or the material. I don't know, maybe it's just the color. Maybe if the color was matched to the steel cladding, the steel panels that you have on the building. Something didn't sit right with me on that.
Great, we'll take a look at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Susanna or Rosemary, you guys one of you want to go next? Let's go, Susanna.
I think Susanna was first.
Okay.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Susanna Dickinson. I'm one of the architects on the panel. And prior to my current job, I worked on a lot of high rises in multiple cities in the US. And I understand, and so I'm going to talk more about the building. I think Carol's covered a lot on the exterior. But I understand that one of the issues is obviously the massing, and a lot of the trouble with residential buildings is trying to create, not just the monotony of repetitive units, which is often the plan, right? But not that I can speak for the whole of Tucson, but I know there's been a bit of frustration with some of the new buildings going up in town in terms of the look of these things. And I would argue one thing would be trying to make it kind of place-based in terms of what is making this not just a typical kind of global piece of development that could be in any city, right? And so often we're talking about the sustainability of the site, but there isn't much guidelines for the sustainability of buildings, which I would advocate as something we could move forwards with to make something a bit more place-based in Tucson. So when I look at the facade, one thing like Carol was saying, I actually like the look of the podium garage, although I'm worried about the scale. And it would be useful in terms of your elevations to put a bit more context in terms of the freeway, the heights of so we can see that against, and I understand urbanistically it's in a bit of a weird situation next to the freeway and not really in the kind of walkable district, but it is following the streetcar. And on the other side of the freeway is something that is really trying to connect downtown into this. So Congress is a pretty prime street that even though people aren't walking now, the goal is to connect, the Mercado and downtown with people either traveling on the streetcar or walking. So I would encourage, having that less suburban massing. But in terms of the facade, what I see lacking is the vision of and reflection of sustainability. The massing doesn't really bother me in terms of, setting down to other buildings because there isn't much context. But the fact the north facade looks just like the east facade, the south facade, and the west facade is what bothers me architecturally. That it would be nice to have some acknowledgement that the sun is going to be very different for those people in those units. And to have some expression of that on the facade is what I would encourage you guys to look at. And I think that could really start pushing something that was more of a Tucson-based architecture obviously this is going to be a very prominent building just because of its height and location. So that's my, and if you look at things like the Phoenix Library, which are kind of architectural icons in our state that Will Bruder did years ago, and obviously this isn't a library and you've got to have openings on all the side, but there was that attention to place and the kind of design of, looking like a mesa. So there was a concept, but also the kind of acknowledgement that the east-west facades are a lot harder to control for the sun. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Thank you.
Rosemary.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I had a few similar comments to what Susanna mentioned, but first I want to take a step back and just say it's so exciting to see this happening in Tucson, and it's really exciting to see our city growing up. I know that people have voiced some concerns about the scale of this building, but 17 stories really, it's not that high. It's not a 77-story building like Chicago's doing. It's something that's in scale with growth for Tucson, and this is how cities grow. You don't have everything come up at once. You have buildings come up one at a time of this scale, and that makes it difficult in terms of finding context. So I just wanted to put that out there, but I do think it's very exciting to see this. I also agree that it would be a fantastic option to have public art down there. I could see a really fantastic large scale sculpture out in front of the building at that corner, and it would just make a lot of impact, and it would just really bring a lot of joy. In terms of the elevations, I think what Susanna mentioned is valid. Shading is a big concern, and the screening for the garage could be more colorful. It could be more evocative of colors, that bring in sort of the surrounding area and Tucson's culture. I don't object to the material. I just think the color could be maybe a little more exciting on that garage. And then I had a question, since I haven't seen the floor plans. I'm curious what views the occupants of the first 3 or 4 floors of the residential section that's adjacent to the parking garage. What will those views look like, or how will there be windows for them? What does that look like? I'm curious about that.
I can speak to that really quickly. Portions of the residential that are at the same level of the parking garage are single loaded. In other words, there's a corridor that only services residents on one side of it. So there are no, obviously you have to have natural light and vent for residents. So everyone who is at the same level as the garage levels, and in fact, most of that space is amenity space for the building and not actually residents there at those lower levels. So they will have views out, and unless you are at the pool deck level, you will not look directly at the garage, if that answers your question.
think it starts to, I'd like to see a section through that area and what it would look like. And I realize it's very early in the process, but I'm just curious what the floor plates will look like for each of those levels. But overall, I think it's a very exciting project, and it's just great to see Tucson growing up.
Thanks, Rosemary. Chris, your hand is up.
All right, thanks, Nate. I'm going to start off with one item I have that's I think is a safety concern. With all the glazing and the angles of this building adjacent to I-10, I would encourage you guys to do a reflectivity study. There are major issues with the buildings at Mill and Tempe Town Lake and the 202 loop at certain hours of the day. It shoots basically a laser beam and blinding traffic along that way, and it's currently a pretty hot topic in future development in that area, and how much glazing and the angles that's happening. So not just a shade study, but I think ADOT might be appreciative if you guys did that extra step. So that's not under our purview. It's just a kind of a sidebar I have dealing with. I'm working on a couple of developments in that zone in Tempe, and that's definitely a thing of concern there. And cars are moving at high rates of speed with basically a laser beam shooting at them. On this project specifically, there's a lot of the right words being used and a lot of the right ideas of what we want to achieve here. But what I'm looking at here currently, I don't think achieves a lot of the ideas that are being expressed. It feels like there's a gateway, but the gateway element is really a 17-story building. The pedestrian experience along Congress here is definitely lacking, and interacting with this building, the massing up to the, if you're going to blow off the setbacks, let's go after it. Like, bring stuff up to the street, it doesn't have to be 17 stories up to the street, but you have an opportunity to bring things right up to Congress and interact with that corner in a much more, I guess, robust way than a monument. A monument sign at the corner of I-10 and Congress is never going to be a selfie spot. But if you had a building and some character and some other reasons that people would actually want to congregate in that spot, then yes, potentially you would get some of that work there. So I'd like to see some work done on that Congress I-10 intersection, the streetscape along there. I'm not sure, even within our Rio Nuevo criteria, that we're hitting the mark on engaging the street or creating an environment that is more than 8 to 5, that has a 24-hour connection to the downtown area. The other area that I think that is lacking is that the loop road around. If that's going to be a loop road for trash trucks, which is basically what it is, it's a fire. If a fire truck goes through there, I hope that only happens ever once. You're building an asphalt road that's 14 to 16 feet wide around your building. That's not the footpath that creates a loop athletic or fitness trail. There's a lot of opportunity to do some other materials in there, maybe even on the sustainability end, which is where we're all pushing. Permeable pavers or some sort of effort like that would be, I think, appreciated by this board on looking at sustainability and plant material. The other point I have is there's a historic building directly adjacent to this site, directly adjacent to the east. It's a highly protected building in our downtown, and this project has decided to turn a parking garage with a metal screen towards that building. And the direct relationship of that historic building to this building is a parking garage with this screen on it. I think we need to look at that and figure out how this structure relates to the adjacent buildings, in context, your overall context of the structure, the buildings. I think you're, sure we're moving to change in Tucson and how buildings are built and what they look like aesthetically. I don't have any, our architects friends on this board have commented to that, but I think at the streetscape and at the pedestrian level, this project has a lot to build upon and work on before we bring it back around to this board.
Great comments, thank you. I do want to point out that it is the back of the depot. And it is that's also, there's going to be an additional, that's where the El Paso Greenway is going to be going in, that the city is putting in with a lot of vegetation and the path. But we hear all of these comments, we appreciate them, and we will get to work. Thank you.
As a landscape architect that's worked on portions of the El Paso Greenway, do not expect that path to have lots of amenities and or tons of trees. That right of way is very, very narrow, and the path is very generously wide. So I understand that the impact of that there's in planning, there's a buffer between these two spaces. In reality, there's not going to be a buffer between these two spaces. And the next thing that you see is a basically back of house of a large building with a 16-foot utility driveway looping around it, right? So
yeah, we got it. Thank you. We're glad we hear you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Got it.
Susanna, your hand is still up. Did you want another opportunity to speak? Oh, it went down. Chris's went down. Anyone else from the design review board have some comments to submit? Or
Yeah, sorry, I'd like to say one more thing.
Please.
Yes, one thing I forgot to mention that I think could be worked on too is the top of your building. I think the way buildings hit the sky, especially tall buildings, is really important for a skyline of a city. And it seems that I don't know if you're planning to have a public amenity up there, but a lot of it is just mechanical penthouse, which is fine and kind of normal. But I would suggest re-looking at, it seems like there's this podium kind of top hat to the design, which in reality, on a tall building, that's not going to create shade. If it was a shorter building, this big roof makes sense. But maybe it could lighten up a bit and kind of maybe some of that cladding of the penthouse could connect to the garage base and kind of tie the building into its side a bit more. If you don't want to incorporate it on the facades for some reason. But I just think that whole top could lighten up and then it would feel like less traditional. I mean, in a bad way, not traditional in a kind of good way. Anyway, thank you.
Any more comments from the design review board? Or shall we return to our agenda?
Yeah, I'll echo Susanna's comment regarding the orientation and being more specific as we're talking about a gateway in a context that we're creating an entry to the city and being a little bit more, I guess, context aware in that way. And then as well, the prevailing setbacks, I think looking at sort of like a massing or a figure ground, getting more of that context into the renderings and into the site plan would help us to understand why we're pushing back at that level or how it's relating to the street in a more purposeful way, I suppose.
That's great.
We really, really appreciate all the feedback and with with the site constraints we have and everything else, we're gonna take all this back and take a look at it and hopefully get to the next level. So thank you very much
Thank you
on
very
behalf of
much.
the team for taking all this time with us. We really appreciate it.
Great. We'll meet again. Back to our agenda. We're now on number 5, which is an overview of the Grant Road Improvement District grid. It's got a great an acronym. And I think this is an informational presentation by staff to the DRB. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Chair. We have Dan Bursick, Section Manager from PDSC, available to give a presentation about the grid. This is informational as we expect our first grid project, the No-Tell Motel, coming soon. So with that, I'll pass it over to Dan. Dan, would you like me to bring up that PowerPoint or do you want to share?
I'm happy to share. Yes.
Okay.
Quick question. Is the No-Tell Motel 17 stories?
Don't believe it is.
No.
Oh, well, fine. We'll still hear about it.
And Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, just as a reminder, the reason Dan is here today to give us all an overview of the grid is because of that project. It's called the Milagro Oracle. It's a senior public housing project. And that's coming in quickly to you. We're expecting it to come to you at the December 16 meeting. And prior to that, we're hoping to take it to the Historic Plans Review Subcommittee December 10. We need you to get familiar with the grid and the process that will be followed. But yeah, that's why we're here today with the grid.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone. I appreciate you inviting me and letting me come and talk to you a little bit about the Grant Road overlay of the grid. I'm going to share my screen real quickly here. Hopefully. Nope. Sorry, 1 second. That did not work like I was hoping. Try this instead. We'll do the presenter view. Okay, cool. Excellent. Great. So Grant Road overlay. This is a project that we had developed over a handful of years back in really it was 2015 through about 2018. There was kind of starts and stops. There was actually an original overlay that was prior to this for that area. But up until now, we haven't really had much interest in this, but we, with obviously the Milagro or the No-Tell Motel project, we're gonna, we're starting to see some interest in utilizing the Grant Road overlay of the grid for that area. So this portion of the Grant Road overlay is really just on phase 1 and phase 2. So there are, as you may know, 6 phases along Grant Road. The first 2 have been completed. They did phase 1 first, phase 2 second. 3 and 4 are going to be done together. I think it's supposed to begin next year. I know there's an estimate for 2026 for 5 and 6, which is that kind of central segment. It may end up being later depending on funding from the RTA. But that we're talking right now about 1 and 2. Mayor and council have directed us to look at additional phases and the Grant Road overlay, which could lead to potentially some changes to this as well as we move forward. So just kind of go over like what is an urban overlay district. I know that you will also be reviewing projects related to the Sunshine Mile overlay district. This is kind of similar in a sense, and the Sunshine Mile kind of built off of what we had done here and what we had done with the infill incentive district as well. So what it does is it provides about optional zoning for property owners. The existing zoning obviously remains in place, and I think you've dealt with this quite a bit related to the Rio Nuevo area and when you review projects down there. It allows for zoning relief in exchange for better design, and then it encourages kind of comprehensively planned design and transit-oriented infill development. It provides flexible zoning solutions such as kind of reduction or flexibility with parking, setbacks, potentially landscaping and building height. And kind of just over to the right on the slide here, just kind of shows kind of obviously the land and the aerial here. This is the underlying zoning. And then right here is kind of the overlay laying on top of it. So it's that optional overlay. So why did we go through and develop an urban overlay district? There were several properties. Essentially what happened was when we came through and redeveloped that corridor with the new roadway project, there was a lot of acquisition and there was a lot of vacant land that was ready for development that was there. But it created some kind of weird, shallow and oddly shaped parcels that would be challenging to develop under traditional zoning, as well as, just kind of the opportunity to go through and have a better design as we kind of move forward from that roadway project that's there. So this is essentially where the grid is located, at least the first two phases. It starts kind of west of Oracle over here. I think probably reaches kind of almost to 15th. Actually, this is 15th, just beyond 15th. It has these little sub-centers. The really only difference there is allowed building height for a lot of them. And I'll go over a little bit of that in a second here. But it runs really from, about 15th, a little west of there, all the way down to Park over here on the east side, east of First Avenue and Euclid. So how we built this, so there was a lot of planning efforts that had gone into the initial roadway project for Grant Road. They had a task force, and then there were workshops and stakeholder meetings that we had done related to the overlay. But there was also an original kind of Grant Road district zoning ordinance that was developed, ended up kind of being sidelined and kind of put on never finished. So we pulled from that. A lot of that project actually ended up making its way into the vision for the Grant Road and the planning document that provides that land use guidance. So there is a Grant Road community character and vitality corridor vision. This runs the entire corridor, so it's really Oracle to Swan. But we pulled from that as far as the different segments. It gave us guidance on the type of development and the intensity of development in different areas. And then also we pulled from other overlays, such as the Downtown Infill Incentive District. You'll see that the Infill Incentive District runs all the way up to Grant. We modeled this portion of it over kind of a similar, I guess, character and development style. So we looked to the greater Infill Incentive Subdistrict, which is this northern portion, as an example of kind of how to set up the Grant Road overlay. So some of the key components of overlays in this overlay, just providing that development relief, such as parking, development standards, landscaping, potential circulation, as well as environmental services access for that. And then exchange for, more landscape screening, building orientation, stormwater management, a lot of different things that are really beneficial. But in general, it's really more compatible design and in the end. In developing this, there was quite a bit of public involvement. We had, between 2015 and 2018, we had a lot of kind of leadership changing and change in the planning and development services between 15 and 18. So there were a couple starts and stops of the project to kind of focus on other things. But we held over that time 6 Grant Road Citizen Task Force meetings where we discussed the drafts and kind of worked through those. We had stakeholder interview meetings with developers, neighborhood representatives. We talked to the Infill Incentive District Study Group representatives who had a lot of experience with developing that, which helped. We had 2 public workshops on land use tools. This is a kind of a visual of one of those meetings where we sat around and just laid out long maps and talked about what could be done and what couldn't be done, talked about constraints of existing sites and opportunities. We had 2 public reviews of the UOD document. We sent it out once and we sent it out again prior to going through the formal the formal process of adopting this. And then there were several individual meetings with stakeholders, residents, businesses along the corridor. We did hold the required neighborhood meeting twice to allow for people to provide that, and that's once we got to that formal process. So kind of some of the common threads that we heard as we were developing this is that parking relief's great, but we want to make sure that there are still protections for neighborhoods. Reduced setbacks will be really important. Bringing buildings forward on lots, having more of an urban kind of development pattern, improved pedestrian environment, help to support those transit connections, more building height at major intersections and less near neighborhoods. There's not a ton of residential that abuts the Grant Road, at least for phases 1 and 2 for this segment. So it allowed for us to build in a little additional building height in certain areas. Green infrastructure and sustainable practices, and then historic protections, and making sure that those are in place if and when an HBZ or something, or an MPZ were to come into that area, or even just a National Register Historic District, which when we adopted this, there wasn't one, and you'll be dealing with this when the Milagro comes through. But since then, the Miracle Mile Historic District has been established. So portions of some certain motor courts and things of that sort overlay with this and require historic review. And protections as well, where you aren't allowed to delist a contributing structure for this, similar to what we do with the infill incentive district and other overlays. So some of the highlights of kind of what some of that flexibility means and what's in this. There are parking flexibility, so you may reduce up to 25% with analysis findings showing that the parking is adequate. You could actually go beyond that with an individual parking plan that's similar to what we have done in the IID, Infill Incentive District, and Sunshine Mile. Surface parking shall be located either next to or behind the building, so it kind of requires you to bring that building to the front and then put the parking in back. And then again, that further reductions may be allowed through shared parking agreements in exchange for additional bicycle facilities and other transit kind of incentives. Setbacks. So perimeter yard requirements may be reduced or waived as long as it's consistent with major streets and routes plan. So we need to make sure, and this has all been built out, so it should be consistent with the major streets and routes plan. But there is adequate sign visibility. So there's like safety issues related to it just to make sure. But as long as you meet those, you would be able to reduce your setbacks. So whether it would be street frontage yard right here, or some of your yard frontage, side yard, rear yard frontage, reduce those setbacks. Landscaping and screening, this is less important, and not like reductions or modifications to landscaping and screening is a little less important in areas as you get away from downtown. In downtown, reductions of landscaping sometimes on existing sites and infill sites is important. But this is more towards, it may be granted, but you have to make sure that if you do have those, shade is provided for pedestrians, and conforms with development transition standards and things of that sort. There are additional standards for landscaping within this related to size, drought tolerance, et cetera, that are built into it. It's very similar to what we have in the infill incentive district and main gate overlay district. Just to kind of point out building heights along Grant Road and within this, within the overlay district, showing here really the intensity at the major intersections. So at the Oracle Center that we have here, it's allowed for 75 feet. Same thing with Stone and Grant, so 75 feet here, and then 60 feet at First Avenue and Grant here. It's really the if the underlying zoning allows for additional building height, it would be able to go up to that. There's only really a little bit of C3 where it would really in this area allow for up to 75 feet, but that's the only situation where it would be like that. And then 40 feet in those segments to have something that's a little more kind of compatible with, you know, some of the R2 and residential areas that may be and smaller development that may be in those segments. So one thing that's important, and has been important in both the infill incentive district and within some of our other overlays, these development transition standards, where the mitigation of taller structures within it. So for this, if you have you can only have a maximum building height of 25 feet within 30 feet of the property line. Building orientation, windows in the second story have to be located to reduce views. So there's criteria related to privacy mitigation, essentially. Balconies need to be oriented away from residential properties. And then there's bulk reduction that's important. So you don't just have those blank facades that are along there, some articulation. There is required mitigation of service areas and required mitigation of parking facilities in other areas as well to make sure that they don't impact surrounding areas. And you have to demonstrate that with your application. Very similar to other overlays. And you'll see that a lot of the stuff in here is similar to what you see in Sunshine Mile when you start getting Sunshine Mile projects. And I think there's one that should be coming to you fairly soon. One thing that was also in Sunshine Mile is in Main Gate and is in this. Are environmentally conscious design practices. So there is a list of environmentally conscious design practices. Every development that comes through must have 3 or more of the following, and there's a bunch of different things related to environmentally conscious design practices. I think in Main Gate it might be more than that. I think it's up to 5. In Sunshine Mile, we reduced it a little bit just because of the fact that property values aren't quite as high on Grant Road, and we wanted to make sure that it was appropriate for that area. This could be something that's changed as well as we move forward. But things such as additional shade for parking areas, at least 70% for pedestrian areas, because I think the requirement is 50%. Cool roofs, Energy Stars, LED lighting, things of that sort. Additionally, just kind of some kind of improved design elements that are required within it. You have to kind of demonstrate certain types of landscaping, right-of-way maintenance, on-site water management, lighting and light trespass, making sure there isn't an impact on the surrounding areas, and then hardscape materials, and there's direction within the guide, within the overlay for that. As far as uses, these are the uses that are generally allowed, within the Grant Road overlay. You could also have additional land uses when they're allowed by the adopted area neighborhood plans and underlying zoning as well. But these are the primary ones, and this is very similar to what we see in what we've used in the infill incentive district as well. So again, just kind of building off of what we've done in the past. And then there is a minor and major review related to this. So smaller kind of scale, and we're using infill incentive district kind of to show what we've seen within that, because it's very similar to the requirements are the same as what we do in infill incentive district, but there's a minor review, which is smaller scale, generally limited impact on residential areas, and those will be reviewed by the design professional. And then larger scale development with potential, that could have potential impacts would be reviewed and conducted. One, there would be a review done by the design professional and the design review board, and you would be reviewing that. So it's the major projects, applications that would be coming to you for review. So with that, this is kind of the overlay. That's kind of an overview of what it does. I believe we shared both kind of an informational sheet, but we also shared the code, which isn't particularly long. I think it's, if I have it in front of me, it's about 20 pages or so, but kind of goes through. B2 is essentially where you would see the requirements for review. And then B3 is really all of the design criteria that must be met and the standards for what you're reviewing to. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions. Again, we haven't had anyone develop under this at this point, so we will see how that goes as we move forward. But it is very similar to the infill incentive district and elements of the Sunshine Mile and Main Gate as well.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan. Nice presentation. And we're going to be seeing our first grid project is the no-tell motel?
I believe so. Maria can clarify, or Amanda can clarify on that.
Yeah, it's called Milagro on Oracle, the senior public housing. So that's another thing I wanted to start exploring with the DRB, since this is a priority project for the community. You know, it's imperative that we can help it move forward as it goes through the process. So I just want to explore with the DRB if we're going to be able to get quorum for December 16. I know
December
it's very
16.
close to the holiday season.
I will be around.
Yeah, I'll be here too. I just wanted to ask a couple questions of Dan. So one issue I know that they have at Main Gate Square, I'm a huge fan of, shade for pedestrians and trees along walkways and all that, fantastic. But I think it just needs to be clarified who's responsible for cleaning up the sidewalk. I know that I've heard Jane talk about it over there, and she keeps it meticulous, but not all the adjacent properties do that, because I think it's unclear as to whether the tenant or the city is responsible for that. So I just think maybe just write something in about that, about who's responsible for clearing litter along those sidewalks. And then just a question about some of the narrower properties, if there's frontage and then parking in the back, from a user perspective, the property owner wants to make the property look as though the main entrance is off the street, right off Grant Road. So it looks nice. And then from the user perspective, you're entering in the rear, and the service entry is often in the rear too. And so just kind of mitigating that as to where the service entry could go, especially with restaurant, or where the trash enclosure is, all of that kind of thing. Is there anything in the code about that?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. There is a bit of flexibility within this. We kind of talked about kind of located to the side or the back for that requirement, but there's also the ability to basically bring urban design best practices. So there's some flexibility in what can be proposed by the applicant. So as they go through and design this, they can propose something that may vary from what's in the code, so long as it's it leads to a better design and a better product. So there is flexibility within it to allow for that. I think the general idea is to get those buildings to pull to the front. But for some of those narrow projects, they may need to apply for that urban design best practice route.
Okay, and then we would only see them as DRB if they're of the larger type.
That is correct. Yeah, you would review the larger projects, smaller projects. This is similar to what we do with the same as what we do with the infill incentive district. Those would go to the design professional. Those are items like change of use that would require normally require a full bring up to code, for you to bring it up all the way up to code, and they may not be able to park it totally, or may not be able to meet exact landscape kind of requirements and things of that sort. So those are generally smaller projects.
Okay, thanks, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you, Dan. I'll bring up the agenda.
Approaching staff announcements. Okay, we are.
I am not aware of any staff announcements. Maria?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members of the DRB, basically it's the Milagro on Oracle. So again, I'm gonna be hoping to reach quorum for December 16. So I see in the chat, Susanna may need to leave early, and Paige won't make it.
I can be there on the 16th.
Okay, great.
Do we need 3 or do we need 4 for a quorum?
Minimum 3 at all times. So like Susanna indicated, she's gonna have to leave early that day. If we lose her and we only have 3 DRB members, that moment we lose quorum and the meeting will need to be stopped. Okay,
Thank you, Maria.
I
so
can be there as well on the 16th, so
Yeah.
I think that's 4.
okay, great. Excellent.
All right.
And Chris and Nathan, will you guys make it? You think?
I'll be able to make it.
Excellent.
And you were asking Chris as well.
Maria, Paige and I will be traveling to Phoenix that day, so we have a prior scheduled event.
Okay. Got it. Okay. Well, that seems like we're gonna be able to reach quorum, so thank you very much. And that's all the updates I have, Mr. Chair. The other thing is that, as you probably are aware, we changed our permitting system. Now we have the Tucson Development Center online. So all applications are now being handled that way. So it's been an interesting ride, but we're all making it work somehow. So just wanted to make you aware.
I believe the superintendents are loving the fact that they cannot call an inspection anymore. They have to log in and type in all the on their computer. Everyone still says call in an inspection, but that's not. I think that's not possible now. You have to go online to get your inspections.
Yeah.
Thank goodness for smartphones, Nate. Thank goodness for smartphones.
I know.
You can do it all.
The future's here, and some of them are hoping to avoid the future.
Yeah, I did that recently, but it worked out well. The system worked for me, so thank goodness. The inspector was there. I didn't hear a word back from him that he's going to show up, but he just knocked on my door at the specified time. It worked. Oh.
And you're sure that was the inspector?
Yeah, I hope so.
Good. Okay, I think we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, happy
everyone.
Thanksgiving. Yes.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
So Amanda, let's make sure to